Hello, it's Robin May, founder of the I Believe in Marriage Network, and I have a question for you. Are you and your spouse in the same marriage? Can I give it to you one more time? Are you and your spouse in the same marriage? Listen, as a licensed professional counselor and a certified life coach, people often come into my office, and if I've been working with a couple for a while, they'll sit on the couch, and this is the question I always ask. All right, guys, tell me how things have been since I saw you last. That's always my leading question. Tell me how things have been since I saw you last. And it never fails. One of the couple, part of them, the husband or the wife, normally the husband will say, things have been really good. Things have been cool. And it never fails. The wife will kind of look like she'll give a look, and I'll probe and I'll say, tell me what that look is about. She'll say, things are not good. It's incredible to me every time it happens. And because I've built a rapport with them, I'll say, listen, are y'all in the same marriage? How is it that you're looking at the same situation? You guys are talking about the same marriage over the same week. And one person says, we're doing pretty good. And the other says, not so good. Listen, I know you might be wondering why I have these shades on. Listen, I'm not trying to be cool. I am trying to make a point. Because I have these shades on, everything I'm looking at has a tint to it. Everything I'm looking at, I can see it, but it's slightly tinted. Imagine that I had on red shades, then everything would have a red tint. If I had on green shades, everything would have a green tint. Basically, I am seeing things through this lens. Listen, I hope you get the point. Each of us, I really want you to get this lesson. Each of us, just because we are human, we are operating based on our own lens and our own filter. Let me teach this to you a little bit. I'm not going to go too deep with it. And people teach it different ways, but I want to keep it as simple as possible. Your lens is the way you see things, and your filter is the way you process things. And simply because you are human, you and your spouse see things differently and you process things differently. That is why two people can sit in my office and they can talk about the same marriage and they can see it totally different. Let's do this quick exercise. I have something for you right here. Let's do this quick exercise. I'm going to hold up this picture. And if you're looking at this by yourself, or if you're looking at it with your significant other, or maybe those of you who are on live right now, tell me as you are looking at this, what do you see? As you are looking at this picture, what is it that you see? For some of you, you might be seeing an old woman. And for others of you, you are seeing a young lady. We are looking at the same picture, but we are seeing two totally different things. Again, if you're looking at it with your spouse, I want to give you a minute to just tell your spouse what you see. And I want your spouse to tell you what they see. If you and your homegirls are looking at this Facebook Live, I want y'all to do the same thing. Do you see the old woman, or do you see the young woman? How can we look at the same picture, but yet we see something totally different? Why is that? Because we have our own lens and we have our own filter. And this is what often happens in our marriages. We are looking at a situation in our marriage and we are convinced that the situation is one way, and our spouse is seeing the situation, or they're looking at it and they are convinced it is a totally different way. That is because we see things through our lens and through our filter. This is why I have taught couples for years that when it comes to your role in your marriage, listen, you cannot grade your own paper. You cannot decide simply that because you say you are a good wife or because you say you're a good husband that you are. You can't automatically assume that you are meeting the needs for your spouse because you are looking at your marriage through your lens and your spouse is looking at the marriage through their lens. Let me tell you this. Your spouse's satisfaction in marriage isn't based on your criteria. Oh, can I give that to you again? Your spouse's satisfaction, whether or not your spouse is satisfied in the marriage, is not based on your criteria. You don't get to determine because I have done this and I've done that my spouse should be happy. Does that make sense? So let's go back to the couple on my couch. The reason they can be in the same marriage but see it differently is because they are viewing the marriage through their lens. So one spouse might say, things are great, it's not that big of a deal. And the other spouse is feeling frustrated because they are desiring something more, but they feel like their spouse is minimizing it. And it's not that their spouse is intentionally trying to minimize it. Sometimes they are, but many times they're not intentionally trying to minimize it. They are just seeing it through their lens and they're looking at the same thing, but they're seeing it totally different. Listen, y'all, I have to drop a big bomb on you. Listen to this. When you said I do, when you stood at the altar, whether you stood before a preacher, whether you stood before a judge, when you stood at the altar, that came with an unspoken agreement that you were willing to meet the needs of your spouse. When you stood at the altar, and a lot of times I like to take my couples through this exercise. I want you to imagine that you're standing at the altar and you're saying your I do's right now, and you incorporate into your I do's the reality of what's going on right now. So you might say, I make the commitment to put my children over my spouse, or I am committed to working more than I nurture my relationship. If you were to incorporate the realities of where you are now, would you really say I do? So when you said I do, when you stood at the altar, you were making an unspoken agreement that I am willing to meet the needs of my spouse. And that requires a willingness to see things not from your own perspective, but from the view, from the lens, from the perspective of your spouse. I want to make sure you really get that. If you are going to help to raise your marital satisfaction, it requires that you not just see things from your own view, from your own lens, from your own perspective. It means being willing to see things, to see the marriage from the perspective of your spouse. If you want your marriage to be one that you and your spouse are mutually satisfied, I just want y'all to think about that. If you want your marriage to be that you are mutually satisfied, it will require that you are willing to see things from the view of your spouse. That means you must be willing to understand that you and your spouse are different and that was God's intention, that it was his intention that the two of you be different. You have to understand that. Number two, you must be willing to learn to accept the difference. Now, you might be saying, Robin, I get that we're different. I just can't accept it. No, you have to accept that you're different. Stop fighting against that. Stop fighting against the fact that, y'all, this alone should set y'all free. Stop fighting the fact that you and your spouse are different. Accept that you're different. And here's the last one. I want you to learn to appreciate the difference. What would happen if you began to appreciate the fact that your spouse doesn't think like you? Oh my gosh. What if you began to accept that your spouse sees the old woman, and instead of trying to convince your spouse to see the young woman, maybe if you started to see, wow, it might be good that he sees the old woman. It might be good that I see the young woman, because we can bring our minds together and we could really do something great because we have two different perspectives. What if you learn to appreciate the differences? So let me give that to you again. You have to understand that you and your spouse are different. That was God's intention. Learn to accept the difference. Stop fighting against it. And what happens if you eventually learn to appreciate the difference? I love to tell this story because when my husband and I first got married, I'm saying when we first got married, it was not when we first got married. We had been married for a minute, and it was time for, we had moved into a new home and we had a lot of space, and it was time to have a Christmas or Thanksgiving or something. And my husband's idea is that everybody should just stay in the same house. We have plenty of space. We should just all pile up in one house, and that would be so much fun because he grew up in a really large family. Well, in my world, I didn't grow up in a large family. Everybody had their own space. So I'm thinking, no, everybody needs their own space. Well, what if we just kept fighting each other about that difference instead of appreciating the difference? Was there a place of compromise? Was there a place for me to see things his way and for him to see things my way, and for us to understand how could we blend that difference together? I know that's a simple example, but often those are the places of major contention that continue to cause challenges in your marriage. So remember, when you said I do, it was an agreement that you are willing to meet the needs of your spouse. One of the ways I like to describe it is, imagine that your spouse is dehydrated. Your spouse is dehydrated and you are the only one who can give them water, but you aren't willing to give it to them. Like, you have the water, you have what your spouse needs, but you refuse to give it to them, and they're sitting there dehydrated. That's what's happening in so many marriages. Our spouses are dehydrated because we aren't willing to step outside of ourselves to see things from our spouse's point of view and begin to meet the needs that they have. What would happen if we did that? And let me tell you one of the holdups for that. One of the reasons it is very difficult for us to step outside of ourselves and meet the needs of our spouse is because we are afraid that it won't be reciprocated. We are afraid that I'm going to do all of this. I'm going to be the one that's stepping outside of my comfort zone. I'm going to be the one trying to meet their needs. I'm going to be the one seeing things from their perspective, and they refuse to do it. They're not going to do it. So I'm going to be left out there hanging. I'm going to be left out there dehydrated, Robin, and my spouse is going to get plenty of water. Let me tell you, 9 times out of 10, that is not how it works. Have y'all seen that commercial that says that's not how any of this works? Most of the time, you'll be surprised that's not what happens. I have witnessed with my own eyes in my office, in personal friendships, in even my own marriage. I have witnessed what happens when one person makes a decision to come outside of themselves and do something different. So I'm not going to be with you guys long. I just wanted to ask you, are you and your spouse in the same marriage? Do you see things differently from your spouse? Are y'all looking at the marriage and your spouse is seeing it one way and you're seeing it another way? And instead of trying to understand, you guys are fighting each other, trying to force your view on the other. What would happen if you stepped back and said, honey, I really want to hear you. I really want to hear it from your perspective. I really want to understand where you're coming from. What if you asked probing questions to get more information? What if instead of allowing your defenses to come up, you stopped a minute and said, now, baby, I'm not getting that part. I don't understand that. Help me to see that. What if you decided to be the reasonable one? What if you decided to be the one who was willing to make some adjustments? What if you were willing to be the one to start the process of change? So I have a tool to help you. If you look right at the top of this Facebook Live, there's a link because there's a report card that I have for you. Remember, I told you, you can't grade your own paper. I want you and your spouse to download that free downloadable report card. There are 12 principles of happy couples. Over my work with couples, I have found 12 principles of couples that are really happy in their marriage. I want you and your spouse to sit down and go over those 12 principles. And I want y'all to grade your marriage. I want you to fill it out. I want your spouse to fill it out. Then I would love for you guys to come back together and look at how you scored the marriage. Now listen, this is an important part. If you are going to do this exercise, you cannot allow your defenses to go up. You have to be willing to hear one another in a way that allows you both to feel free to have the conversation. So just click the link right above. It's 12 principles to happy couples. Just go to IBelieveInMarriage.com/report card. IBelieveInMarriage.com/report card. Do that. And then I'm going to check in with you in a couple of days to see how you did. Okay. Again, are you and your spouse in the same marriage? Are y'all seeing things so differently and you're wondering how in the world are we looking at the same thing and seeing something different? It is because you have a lens, you have a filter. Your spouse has a lens, your spouse has a filter. And until you make the intentional effort to change places, to exchange places, to see things from your spouse's perspective, you guys are going to continue to butt heads. And that's not what we want. Again, this is Robin with IBelieveInMarriage.com. If this helped you, share it. Tell your people to come check it out. Tag them below. All right? I'll be back soon. Talk to you later.